Welcome to the Power Foods Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Kristy Jo, mind and body strategist and fitness nutrition specialist. You're listening to episode number 227, Carb Cycling and Phase 2 Metabolic Flexibility. I hope you've already subscribed to the Power Foods Lifestyle blog over at powerfoodslifestyleblog.com. That's where I'm not only putting the written version of each podcast, but making additional posts with Power Foods Lifestyle recipes you can enjoy on your own or with your family. Now, real quick, before we get into today's topic, I want to tell you about the benefits of becoming a Power Foods Lifestyle supporter on Patreon. When you become a gold or platinum champion with your monthly donation, you will earn access to the PFL digital recipes, PDFs, handouts, and other programs I've created just for you. And when you become a platinum supporter of the Power Foods Lifestyle, you get all of that plus a one-on-one coaching call with me every single month. This is what supports the show, helps me get more information out to more people. Click on the link in the show notes to become a supporter today, and thank you for your support of the show, the blog, and my passion to get this information out to more people. All right, PFL champs, let's now move into today's discussion. I hope you've already listened to the introduction and phase 1, which are the previous 2 podcast episodes. Those will be very important as we dive into more of the purpose for phase 2 in your healing journey, whatever you are dealing with, whether it be a gut issue, a mental health issue, stubborn fat loss, hormonal imbalances, or just those pesky symptoms that keep showing up. This is the approach you need to take. In these episodes, I'm giving you the protocol to follow. So I'm giving you the exact how-to, a lot of the stuff that you don't get from listening to other podcasts or reading blog posts. I want to make this actionable and something that you can start applying right away. In phase 1, we covered ketosis and how to get your body in a state of elimination for many of those exacerbating elements that can easily creep into the diet when we're not paying very close strategic attention. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, you will know when it's time to move on to phase 2, when you're psychologically feeling like you need some carbs, you can't maintain this no carb approach, you're really just missing those, you think you're going to break soon. Maybe life seems to be a little more hectic and going full keto at this point feels a really difficult task. And so you still want to focus, you still want to lose weight, but perhaps you're ready to have a little more flexibility in food options, not be so rigid and regimented. Now, it's appropriate for you to move into phase 2 if you have not experienced any bloating or digestive distress in the previous 10 days of compliance. Now, the third one is really rare when you're following the plans that I make available to you, whether you purchased them before Body Buddies shut down at the end of July 2019, or you can actually order these meal plans for phase 1, 2, and 3 from me if you just email me at powerfoodslifestyle@gmail.com. If you're following those plans and the outline that I've given you, really it's rare if females that your period has stopped, but there are always outliers, there are always exceptions. So in the event a female has had her period stop from doing ketosis and she's in her childbearing years, I don't want to see that period missed for more than 1 to 2 months. We want to get that as regular as possible, and so it would absolutely be appropriate to move into phase 2. Again, let me reiterate, you can lose weight in phase 2. I have watched so many individuals revert to phase 1 and just doing full bore keto because they think they're not going to lose weight in phase 2 by adding in carbohydrates. And we form a very unhealthy relationship with carbohydrates when we have that mindset. We're not really understanding their role. We're not understanding macronutrient balance, consistency, etc. And so by understanding phase 2, and hopefully by the end of today's podcast episode, you will feel a little more confident in trusting the process. It's very simple that if your calories are the same between phase 1 and phase 2, let's just use the 1550 mark because that's about the calories I give the females in the meal plans for phase 1, 2, and 3, and the protein is approximately the same, but all we're doing is we're titrating the fats down while we're bringing the carbs up. Again, the calorie total between both phase 1 and phase 2 is still the same. This is why the phrase calories in, calories out does actually have a lot of credence. But we also need to look at the key factor being what is comprising and contributing to those calories. And so again, the very strategic transition from a phase 1 to a phase 2 where we start cycling in carbohydrates, and I'll go through what that looks like every 3 to 4 days. Some people do every 2 days, and that's fine, but it is the respective nature of keeping the calories the same on both types of days. It's going to build your metabolic flexibility, meaning that you can use both carbs and fats as energy yielding nutrients. Your body can easily use both of them. You're not going to blow up from eating carbs. You're not going to suddenly gain a bunch of rapid weight. This is the absolute way to exit keto and to ensure that you're listening to your body, you're learning your body, you're training your body, and understanding what carbohydrates work well in your body. So please take this path when exiting keto. Now, if you're done losing weight and really happy with your body composition, sure, this is great to also take the route towards phase 2 in shifting toward a more moderate carb intake. The key being that when we're adding carbs, we don't forget that we must reduce our fat intake so that we are balancing those calories again. The weight loss that you've achieved through phase 1 will have cleared out a lot of the insulin resistance that naturally results when you're carrying extra body fat, and it's going to help you to handle a few more carbohydrates. That's one reason why, if you do have a long way to go with body fat loss, it is okay to stay in keto for up to 6 months. I am perfectly fine with that, and the majority of my past clients have achieved their greatest success when they stay in keto until psychologically it's not really appropriate for them, and then they come into more of a phase 2 or phase 3, which phase 2 is cyclical keto or carb cycling, and phase 3 is a moderated graduated carb approach or a basic power foods lifestyle structure with even carbs and fats contribution. Kind of think of it like a 40% protein, 30% carbs, 30% fats. That's a very rough estimate, but that's the appropriate place to go when you need that little reset psychologically. You need to just catch your breath, maybe the holidays, maybe travel, maybe school got intense, maybe work got intense, maybe you had a baby, whatever it is. And then when it's appropriate, then you can go back into a phase 1. My whole purpose in putting together these phases is to really give you the tools and the roadmap to become your own personal strategist. This really is the roadmap I've used for thousands of clients. The meal plans don't always look the exact same on an individual basis, but the strategy, the approach, the protocol being really what works and what gives you tools to understand many of the nutrition strategies out there, why they work, etc. But again, this being hopefully laid out in a very logical manner so you can understand it. Now, please remember that phase 1 keto, maybe you did it for the 28-day challenge. Maybe you tried it and it just really was not a fit for you psychologically. Your body felt like garbage. Everything is not always a fit for everyone. And again, remember, you have to differentiate in your mind the difference between a strategic, tempered approach towards healing versus a lifestyle. And so I do not teach keto as a PFL lifestyle. Therefore, if it really was hard for you and you can't see yourself doing another 4 weeks, perfectly fine. You didn't fail. Let's just get you into phase 2. Again, you can still lose the weight. Let's keep the calories to the point where that's about 300 to 400 calories deficit from what your body will maintain weight at. And that's assuming you're not changing anything with your workouts at all from what you're just doing on a daily basis to keep standardized weight. No gain, no loss. Only then should we add, in addition, a little bit of cardio. That's always a difficult equation for people because they read on the internet and all these blogs and social media, fitspiration type people, all of these finite formulas. And you guys, I will tell you that it's very rare I use those formulas because they're a great starting point for people. But when you've worked with thousands of people like I have, you see that there are so many outliers that you just can't use those. So if you are in a place that you just would like way better estimations for your body and you want someone to actually look at what you're doing, I am available for those types of consultations. We just do them on Skype or Facebook Messenger. I can do them with anyone in the world as long as you speak English. So just reach out to me at powerfoodslifestyle@gmail.com. Now in this episode, the really number one thing that I want to look at on a functional health level of what begins to happen for healing in phase 2 is that through the addition of the right types of PO-carbs, that's going to be a new introduction for many of you in the Power Foods lifestyle. PO-carbs is our shortened word for power carbs. It's very important we start adding this in to differentiate in our minds the difference between a power carb and a non-strategic carb. I have observed so many of our Power Foods lifestylers, even though I'm so proud of you that you do realize that carbs are carbs are carbs, sugars are sugars are sugars. But when we're talking about a healing journey, we're talking about diversification of the gut microbiota and the microbiome, that PO-carbs, those naturally grown from the earth, those that we do want to be seeing in the diet, things like lentils or couscous or whole wheat or black beans, fruit. These are the types of carbs. Those are PO-carbs versus using wheat thins or even like a corn tortilla or processed maltodextrin-filled protein bars with 20 grams of carbs. Those are not our PO-carbs, okay? And so I just want to make sure you understand that as we are looking to bring those types of foods into our diet in order to diversify the gut microbiota so that you are building a stronger immune system, you are having less of these problematic symptoms, you're exacerbating any existing and long-term health conditions less and less frequently. One of the important reasons that we want to be bringing PO-carbs into phase 2 is that they contain polyphenols, which are plant compounds which contain numerous health benefits, including reducing blood pressure, inflammation, cholesterol levels, and oxidative stress. Now, polyphenols can't always be digested by human cells, and so since they're not absorbed efficiently, they're going to make their way to your colon where they can be digested by gut bacteria. So really, really cool thing there, because we want that gut bacteria to be growing and to be diversifying. Now let's review what we began doing in phase 1 that stopped feeding that bad bacteria. The top 5 allergens include sugar, hydrogenated oils, gluten, dairy, and carbohydrates. I hope that you totally remember what those are. If not, you probably need to go back to the previous episode and listen to phase 1 again, but that's important that we kicked those out. Now, much of that will continue to stay out, but in phase 2, we're going to start bringing in lower glycemic fruits and PO-carbs to start colonizing that gut bacteria. Some other benefits is that we're going to be allowed more mental control practice of moderately bringing in carbs on those carb cycles. So we will be bringing in carbs every 2, 3, or 4 days. It's up to you. But basically what I would want to see is someone do 2 days of the dropped carbs ketogenic approach and then 1 day of a moderate carb day. Or you could do a 3-to-1 with 3 days of the dropped carbs, 1 day carb day, or you could do a maximum of 4 days of the dropped carbs, and on the 5th day you're doing the carb day. Now in past, especially when I was using this approach for many of my fitness competitors, I would keep them away from a 4-to-1 until they were at the very end, just because it did tend to push people a little bit more psychologically and physically. So I'd probably have you start out, if you're just on the healing journey and all of that, then let's start you out on a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 and just see how you do. You can always adapt and listen to your body, and you know better than anyone yourself and your mind and how you're reacting to everything. But that's where I'd have you start out is that approach. On the carb day, all we're doing is we're taking the dropped carbohydrate amount from our ketogenic approach, what we got really used to in phase 1, and what's also in the dropped carb days of phase 2, and we're multiplying that by about 2.5. So if I was eating 40 grams of carbs on my dropped carb day in phase 2, then on my carb up day, I would be having anywhere from like 95 to 110 grams of carbohydrates. Now it's really interesting because some people ask, well, should I be multiplying that 2.5 times the net carbs or the total carbs? And I really hope your dropped carb day is looking totally Power Foods lifestyle, which means you can count net carbs. You're reducing the fiber from the foods you're eating because they're all naturally grown. And if so, then I'm perfectly fine if you do the 2.5 times the total carbs, which is going to get you more carbs. That could even get you up towards 120 to 150 grams of carbohydrates on the raised carb day. Engaging in phase 2 is going to help you maintain lower insulin levels and regulate blood sugar through practicing your portioning, your pairing, and your timing principles. The carbohydrate day is not a free-for-all. I'd like you to stick with the same structure we have employed in our previous phase. So whether you are doing small frequent meals throughout the day every 2.5 to 3 hours, or whether you're following an intermittent fasting schedule, that's perfectly fine and up to you, but let's stick to the structure so we're not just slamming all our carbs in one big meal and chalking it up to, well, it was carb day. That's not the approach to healing. That's not the approach to being a strategist in the Power Foods lifestyle. We plan our meals, we moderate them, and we keep the impact load of those carbohydrates pretty tapered throughout the day. So if you're having 2 meals, then those carbs should be evenly divided. If you're having 6 meals, those carbs should be evenly divided between each of those meals, okay? Now you will keep the inflammation down when you're controlling those carbohydrate portions and you're choosing carbs, okay? This is really important because a lot of people have fear that they're going to suddenly ignite all of these processes in their body because carbs and oh no and demonic and maybe for you that is true, and the only way for us to know is for you to test it and to do so deliberately with a data-seeking mindset. So those carbs are going to include our really wonderful carbs. Things like oats, red potato, sweet potato, black beans, all types of beans, lentils, couscous, quinoa, fruit, etc. Now we're also going to teach your cells to become more glucose responsive. That's, remember, the sugar that comes from carbohydrates, and your insulin sensitivity is going to enable more of that metabolic flexibility, as I mentioned before. So let's go ahead and dive into what I'd like you to be doing in phase 2. It's going to definitely feel like keto on your dropped carb days, so maybe just think of it like it's my keto day or it's my carb day. I really recommend calendaring out the days that you will be dropped carb versus raised carb, as this will help you to plan a little more efficiently. It's very important that as you are looking over your agenda for the next day, where do you need to be, what appointments do you have, that you are also considering what type of meal day is it for me, where are those meals going to fall, and this is a part of a strategist's mind. This is just part of what we do because we need to plan ahead. We visualize our meals as a part of our day because it is fueling for our body and for this intention of energizing ourselves, providing what we need so we can go out to be our best self. Now in phase 2, I wouldn't recommend necessarily testing to see if you're in keto. You can, for sure, and you may observe that you are regularly slipping in and out of keto, but please don't let that stress you out. That is not the goal of phase 2. So really, I would put away your urine strips, I'd put away any blood tests, any ketone measures that you had, and let's just focus on, again, keeping the calories the same and changing up that metabolic flexibility and those energy input sources on the different days. I'd like you to plan your carb meals and your days strategically. So that means around your workouts, whether it's before or after, plan them for days that are more likely to be with family and friends and doing outings, or days that you know are higher emotional triggers than others. Maybe a Friday night is just a big trigger for you. Maybe Sunday night is a big trigger for you. If that's the case, nothing wrong with saying every Sunday is absolutely a carb day, and maybe I'll do Monday, Tuesday dropped carb, Wednesday carb, Thursday, Friday, Saturday dropped carb, Sunday carb. Maybe that's your schedule. And you can always flip it around. Don't feel like if you do a 2-to-1 that you can't flip it around the next day or the next round and do 3-to-1. And then after that 3-to-1 phase, then go back to a 2-to-1 or go to a 1-to-1. So it's perfectly fine. Again, this is a tool for you to use. And as long as you are planning ahead, as long as you are being aware and visualizing what's going to happen on each of these days, you're going to be just fine. Now, I'd like you to keep your carbs in balanced PVC meals so they are always balanced with that anchor of a protein and veggie. Remember that protein helps to anchor the carbohydrates. If you eat carbohydrates on their own, their load or the amount of insulin they produce is larger than if you are to combine it with a protein. I also love you to eat your vegetables with your P and your C, because if we're going to bring in insulin, which yes, no matter what carbs you're eating, your insulin's going to be secreted. And again, that's a beautiful part of your body. Please don't be afraid of that. But that's an absorption hormone. That's a storage hormone. And so what better thing to put in your body than vegetables with that meal, so you are absorbing those vitamins, those minerals, those antioxidants that will help your body. Let's make sure those get pulled into the system. Very strategic. So again, carbs should be eaten in a balanced PVC meal. Notice that in most cases, we will pull the F or the fat from the meal so as to titrate that carb versus fat. That means that basically if one goes high, the other is going to balance out low. If one goes low, the other one balances out high. That's why PVC and PVF are really interchangeable in terms of calories, but they have different energy nutrients attached to them. Also remember, a typical recommendation for a C is 20 to 30 grams of carbs, where an F is 8 to 12 grams of fats, and that is because they both carry different caloric loads. There are 9 calories per gram of fat, where there are 4 calories per gram of carbs. Now in phase 2, make sure you pay attention to how your body does with certain types of carbs. I would like you to introduce a gluten-containing carb and see how your body does. Unless you know you have celiac, unless you know you have an absolute sensitivity to gluten, but I would really recommend you try it, because oftentimes it's not so much the gluten that our body had issues with, it's how we've been eating it. And so many people find they can actually eat gluten. It's that they needed to package it in a PVC meal, get their meal timing on, and be more consistent with their meals in general. That it wasn't the gluten itself that was causing a problem for their body. Now, some people may find that legumes make them swell. If you are eating lentils and you know those make you really gassy, or even black beans for that matter, any other beans. I personally like soaking beans. I don't usually use a ton of the canned type. I'm buying them in the bag. By the way, that's way cheaper, which is awesome to save money, and it's great for food storage. And you just put those in the Instant Pot and you just soak them, or you can put them in a large bowl. Remember, they do swell, so don't fill them up to the top when they're raw. Otherwise, you will have an overflowing marshmallow bean bucket when you wake up the next morning and they are soaking. So about 24 hours, soak them and then cook them, whether it be on high on the rice setting, whether you put them in a slow crock pot cooker, or whether you put them on the stove and just boil them. And that might clear up what is causing you to bloat, which is those oligosaccharides. However, if you're still bloating, that's perfectly fine. Let's swap out the type of carbohydrate. It's not that you shouldn't be doing carbs, it's the type of carb. And so let's try some of the other ones. Let's try red potato, let's try sweet potato, let's try fruit, let's try oats. Let's try all the different types of rice, short grain, long grain, and be exploratory about your body, but be very careful that if you've tried under 3 times to introduce carbs and you bloat each time, and it's been a different carb every single time, I would be very careful not to suddenly say, my body just can't do carbs, until you have tried 3 different versions, 3 different ways, you've tried cooking it the way I've suggested. Then I really don't think you have a right to say, my body just doesn't do carbs. Be very careful of that extreme dogmatic approach, and instead give your body the time and space to introduce these types of foods. It's a beautiful machine that can work very well, but it needs that time. Much like a child, you just need to teach it, train it, and temper it. Now, just as in phase 1, I'd like you to make sure your protein powder is sweetened with stevia and not sucralose if you can manage that and afford it. Make sure you're eating moderate amounts of protein. It's perfectly appropriate in phase 2 to have your protein come up just slightly. It doesn't need to stay down at 20 to 25% of your total daily calories. If you'd like them to come up to 25 to even 40% on your carb days, that's fine. You don't need to stress about your body turning excess protein into glucose in this phase. Now in phase 2, you can choose whether you stay dairy-free or you want to slowly bring it in. Just make sure you use it in proper macro strategy. I'd recommend the first dairy you bring in would be a 2% cottage cheese. Half a cup to 2/3 a cup is an appropriate protein portion. You can use that once a day as a pea. It will have some residual fats, but hopefully you guys have read the Power Foods Lifestyle and you'll remember if a food is classified as a power macro, so in this case it is a power protein, then you do not worry about the residual fats. That is if you are PFL tracking, meaning in your head. If you are tracking in a macro counting app, then yeah, of course that's going to count those extra grams of fat. The way that you track is really, it needs to be specific and appropriate for you. There are times and places that you can be as deliberate as tracking with a macro app, and there's other times that I prefer people PFL track because it's more sustainable. It helps teach you a higher level of awareness and choice rather than just plugging it in an app and letting the data tell you where you're at. So it's up to you which you choose. They both have their pros and their cons that perhaps would lead us to choose a different strategy. Make sure you're eating 4 to 6 cups of leafy greens per day, half a cup of olives daily. Utilize your healthy oils, including MCT, coconut, olive, avocado, butter, and ghee. Eat 2 plant-based fats for each 1 saturated animal fat. That's a very important lifelong Power Foods lifestyle principle that's even more important when we're in keto, but it really is a lifelong principle. So just make sure that you are getting in those plant-based fats. Those are the number one things that I see are missing from people's diets as I do analysis. Avocado and olives and nuts and seeds and healthy oils. These should be so standard in our diets, in our pantries, in our fridges. Eat a serving of cruciferous veggies every day. That includes your broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and bok choy. Use stevia to sweeten foods. You can also use a monk fruit sweetener. That's perfectly fine. But let's, in phase 2, stay away from using white sugar and even raw honey. I'm not a fan of agave. If you've read the book, The Power Foods Lifestyle, you'll know that. Make sure that in phase 2, you are still taking your 400 to 500 milligrams of magnesium, your potassium, especially on those dropped carb days, and salt your foods. Now, I will mention this. Some people who follow very closely on social media will know that I have always had a very interesting issue with potassium, and I've really never heard anyone else report this same problem. And so I just want to put it out there because maybe you are that other person that's like, oh my gosh, I needed that. So when I go from eating low carb into introducing carbs again, my body is very potassium sensitive. And so what happens is that when your body needs to secrete insulin and to absorb the glucose, get it into the cells, that this can displace potassium. When you displace potassium, what can happen is your body results in cramping. And so I have studied my body enough and learned enough that anything over 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrates at one time after a low carb phase will completely shut down my lower half into almost a seizure-like muscle cramp. And it's very painful, and it's been very scary in the past as I've dealt with it and learned about it. And so now I preemptively will take 100 to 200 milligrams of potassium before introducing carbs, especially if I know it's going to be a higher carb amount, if I'm not being very strategic and it's just kind of an indulgence or something. But I did want to mention that because in the rare case that that happens to you, you can start to manage it on the front end by preemptively taking that potassium. Yes, you should be taking your 400 to 500 milligrams of magnesium every night, but that never really prevented this. It's a very specific, like at that point situation when you are eating those carbohydrates. It literally happens within 3 to 5 minutes after eating the carbs. It's crazy to feel in my body. So just make sure that you're doing that, and then salting your food with a sea salt or a pink Himalayan salt is great as well. Should you be using an exogenous ketone supplement? Well, if you would like to, if it's budget friendly for you, it's not a big deal, it's not a strain on your budget, absolutely still do exogenous ketones on your dropped carb days. Can you do it on your raised carb days? Absolutely. Why not try it? Why not? Because especially where exogenous ketones are being shown to benefit so much of the brain and on that therapeutic level, not so much about like it being so ideal for fat loss and weight loss. That's really where most of the science is pointing. And so try it, test it. Again, if that's a budget friendly thing for you, that could be totally appropriate. And I will have a link for you to purchase the ketones I recommend in the show notes. Now, when you are introducing these carbs, and if you are of the athleticism to be doing more high intense training, whether it be lifting, more powerlifting, whether it be sprinting, whether it be biking or higher intensity class movements, things like high fitness or Zumba, then try doing one of those types of training about an hour after one of your carb meals and just see how your body feels. I want you to experiment with the timing of those carb meals, whether it's an hour before or whether it's 4 hours before. True carb loading would be more of a taper over the course of 1 to 4 days, and that's a topic for another time for those of you who are endurance athletes. But in this case, just to see how it feels when we're doing short-term experimentation. Try 1 hour before the workout, the next day the next carb day, try 4 hours before the workout, or the next carb day, try the carb meal after the workout. Just play around, see how your body likes it, what feels good to you psychologically, physiologically, energetically, and then you can be versatile with that carb timing. The key is for you to think like a curious detective. And last but not least, on the do's, make sure you do go for a walk each day, regardless of if you're going to be doing any of that high intensity training. Definitely go for a walk. 10 to 30 minutes is fantastic. Get out and move. Now, nutrition strategy don'ts include using carbs as a way to feel better. Only use them as fuel. In this phase, I want you to be very careful that we are not coping with carbs. Now, if you happen to have planned a carb meal and that happens to be the time that you would like a little bit of something, maybe you wanted chicken and rice versus like a chicken soup broth with coconut milk as the fat, then woohoo, that worked out. But if you're planning your carbs as more emotional strategy of coping, that's what we want to really avoid throughout this journey through the phases of phase 2 and 3. When you're not doing strategic eating, that's fine. I hope by then you've developed habits to start to recognize when you're using those carbs as fuel. And we'll be putting more episodes out on the binge bye training protocol of really looking inside and doing that analysis that we all need to realize why we're choosing the foods we are. Now, be careful not to eat red meat more than 1 to 3 times per week. I'd prefer to see you eating grass-fed or grass-finished beef or pork. Try not to eat more than half a cup of nuts or seeds daily. Don't count net fiber in this phase. We're just going to be functioning off the total carbohydrate amounts for both the dropped carb day as well as the total carb day. The only exception to this is if 100% of your foods on your dropped carb ketogenic day are from the earth, those natural vegetables that contribute the fiber and the carbohydrates, and that's fine if you want to reduce that. Be careful not to bring in non-strategic carbs to your carb cycling day. This phase does not need to last a long time. You can absolutely do it. And if you need to, I love that you know how to do it. So what I'm referring to is if instead of the half cup of black beans for carbohydrates, which has about 22 to 24 grams of carbohydrates, instead you're bringing in a half cup of golden grams, which has approximately the same carbohydrate count, and you're still pairing it with your protein, you're still pairing it with your vegetable. I mean, that was a very strategic exchange. And it's the Power Foods Lifestyle way to eat non-strategic carbs. But again, I advise you to clear the gunk out of your body, leave these processed non-strategic carbs out, and let's focus on really making those carbs the only carbs you're introducing in phase 2. Last but not least, make sure you're weighing yourself no more than once per week and never on the day after a carb day. Why is that? Because your carbohydrate amount may impact the amount of water you're holding. For any gram of glucose or sugar that's stored as glycogen, it's going to need 3 to 4 molecules of water to hold it. So as you can see, that's definitely going to attract more water in your body. The same reason why when you suddenly cut carbs that you could seemingly lose a lot of scale weight quickly is just because your body's purged the water that's been holding that as glycogen. So let's just remember that simple science and not overly obsess with that. Now, there are so many people I spend time with on the phone in our consultations that they're describing their hectic, busy days, their ability to put everybody else's priorities over their own. You may know what that sounds like in your own life, and just even forgetting to eat. So those alarms in your phone to remind you are very, very powerful. And it's rare that I find someone who food preps and sets alarms in their phone that I see is not hitting those goals. Make sure that you focus on what you get to eat. It can be very easy if we're mentally lax that we slip into a restrictive and want this, want that mindset. So again, just think about what you get to eat. Think about what you're blessed to eat. When you take more of that introspective approach towards the power of relativity and looking at the fact that you're very blessed to have the resources you have to buy food, to prepare food. You're not living back in the 1300s when you have to go hunt for your own food. You go forage for all of this. Then it's a really powerful exercise. So make sure you do your best to keep yourself in that mindset. have 2 to 3 go-to fast food items or dining out that you're going to order if you get caught in a bind. So whether that's thinking about all the different fast food places that can offer you a bunless hamburger or chicken burger or turkey burger, things like Chick-fil-A or Carl's Jr. or Burger King or In-N-Out. These are great, as well as Chili's, Applebee's. They all have some form of a sirloin with vegetables or a salad with chicken on the side. Very simple once you know what you're doing, which think in terms of those PVFCs, you can make it happen. Tell others your goals and ask for their help and accountability. Every single one of us needs accountability. So whether it is a friend that you text at the end of every single day, whether it is a chart that you set up yourself for a reward at the end of the week, definitely make it a non-edible reward, something like a bubble bath, alone time, date night, a new pair of socks or clothing, or something that you would look forward to. That's always a great way to incentivize yourself, which would require you to discipline yourself and not just go buy those things or indulge in those things just because. You have to earn them. That's the power of accountability and incentivization, yes, even as adults. Plan your carbohydrate days. We harped on that a lot during this episode. And if you are going to have those non-strategic carbs, again, I advise against it, but a few ways that you can avoid that is going to be don't buy them. Don't keep them around you. If you can manage to do that, that is the best thing. Now, I realize many of you live in large households. You have a lot of kids, a lot of people around. And the fact is, I don't want you to impose your eating style on other people if they're not ready for it. Power Foods lifestyle and strategic eating has to be a personal decision. Otherwise, it will have negative ramifications. As good as your intentions may be, every person has to get to the point where they want to learn, they want to make changes. And so please be careful about imposing and saying no Cheetos, no ice cream for the whole family because I'm doing this thing that's going to cause some resentment and perhaps even some negative ramifications in developing children and their feeling of restriction and rebellion, etc. So we don't want that psychological damage for them. So how do you know when it's time to move on to the next phase? Phase 3 will be the next podcast episode, so look forward to that. Well, you would move on when psychologically you're feeling like you really need even more carbs. You'd like to have carbs every single day, not in crazy amounts, but you would like to have that rice or those oats or those whole grains every single day rather than every 2 to 3 or 4 days. You can move into phase 3 if you feel like you can still control that caloric intake even by having more carbs, which again, remember the way we do this, protein will stay constant and we will titrate the fats. We bring them down when raising carbs. So total output of calories is about the same, which is why, yes, even in phase 3, you can lose weight. The addition of carbs in the diet does not automatically equal you not losing weight. Let's be very careful of that mindset here at Power Foods Lifestyle. It is a faulty mindset. It is unwarranted. It is completely unvalidated in the science and research. So please don't give way to that societal belief. It's very trendy right now and it's damaging for your long-term health success. Also, feel free to move into phase 3 if you have not experienced any bloating or digestive distress in at least the last 10 days, especially if you have been introducing diversity in the carbohydrates that you're eating and you're not just eating oats at every single carb meal. You know, you gotta bring in that diversification. That is, again, the goal of bringing carbohydrates into the diet. The microbiota is going to build stronger in those colonies of bacteria, helping to build greater stamina in your immune system, helping to strengthen the gut wall, and overall helping your body have the bacteria to increase your longevity. At this point, you can move into phase 3, but I do definitely recommend the minimum 28 days or 4 weeks be spent in phase 2. As a reminder, you can get your hands on phase 1, 2, and 3 meal plans that are descriptively written out and easy to follow. Hundreds of people have already followed these plans and love them. Then you can get your hands on those if you don't already have them by emailing me at powerfoodslifestyle@gmail.com. Hey PFL champs, if you're not already, go follow Power Foods Lifestyle on Instagram to get helpful reminders, motivation, and education as you move throughout your week. Turn notifications on so you never miss a post. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review on iTunes or the podcast player you are listening on. This does wonders for helping our show ranking and for helping me continue this podcast. So if you haven't yet, do it. Right now, I would like a running mama who left this review to email me at powerfoodslifestyle@gmail.com so she can claim a free little gift I'd like to give her for her 5-star review. She says, Kristy has a simple approach to the complex and emotionally charged subject of nutrition. She is realistic but firm with her beliefs, and her knowledge shines through in the way that she explains concepts. I have been listening and learning from her for years and continue to learn from her. She is willing to change her trajectory as her life and viewpoints change and isn't afraid to admit so. Love her honesty and hope she continues to produce high quality content for a long time. A running mama, you are the best. Thank you so much. Reviews like this help the show so much. So I look forward to you sending me your mailing address so I can send you a thank you, and look forward to many more of these awesome reviews coming. And I mean, maybe it's not an awesome review. Tell me the truth. I'd like to learn. I'd like to know what's hitting with you guys, what you want more of, what you're appreciating, etc. So thank you in advance for that. And thank you again to all the Power Foods Lifestyle supporters on Patreon. If you find this content to be enjoyable and of value to you in your life, click on the show notes and head over to my Patreon page to become a supporter today. As always, make the choice to power your body one meal, one workout, and one day at a time. One final reminder, the information in this episode is provided for informational purposes and is not meant to substitute the advice provided by your own physician or medical professional.